So we've talked about succession and how there can be different disturbances that affect specific communities. And those disturbances, we said, could be anything from like natural disasters, so a tornado, a hurricane, a tsunami, to, disease or fire. Another type of disturbance are invasive species. So these can also disrupt an ecosystem. So we're going to talk a little bit about invasive species so we can better understand what they are. So first of all, a non-native species. A lot of people use these two terms, invasive and non-native, interchangeably, but there's a difference. A non-native species is an organism that's been introduced into a new area. Well, that's the same as an invasive species. It's basically a species that's living in a community that it's not native to, where it doesn't belong. So, for example, horses. Horses did not belong in the United States. They did not live in the United States until the European settlers came over, and they brought horses over to the US with them. So, horses can be considered non-native species. They weren't originally found in the United States. However, they're here now. So what's the difference between a non-native species and an invasive species? So what I'm going to have you do is, instead of writing this whole big thing, because notice this beginning part, an organism that has been introduced into a new area, is the same as a non-native species. What I want you to do is just write, you can write same as above, or you can draw an arrow, and then write and has negative effects on the economy, the environment, or people's health. So an invasive species is the same thing as a non-native species, but it causes harm. So a non-native species doesn't necessarily do damage. It just kind of exists where it's not supposed to, but it's not disrupting a whole lot of the ecosystems or causing a lot of harm. Some of you may have seen signs like this. If you go boating, we're going to talk a little bit about zebra mussels, but zebra mussels are invasive species. So sometimes you will see invasive species signs alerting you to do certain things or not do certain things so that you prevent these invasive species from spreading. I'm going to minimize these for a second. Why are invasive species bad? So we're going to talk about, well, we said that they cause harm, but how exactly do they cause harm and why exactly are they bad? Well, first of all, invasive species can alter food chains. So imagine, we're going to talk about the zebra mussel, but imagine you get an organism that comes in and eats all of the one specific plant in an area. Well, all of a sudden, there's not going to be any of those plants left for any other organisms. So they can specifically alter food chains, all right, and cause other organisms to die out because they're stealing some of the food that those other organisms would eat. All right, they typically reproduce quickly. So this is why they're kind of pests or nuisance. It's because they reproduce really quickly, and so they form this really big army of invasive species. And as a result, they're able to overtake a whole ecosystem. So whereas an ecosystem used to have a lot of biodiversity, maybe now it doesn't, and it just has a lot of this one specific organism. They often have no natural predators. So when they move from their ecosystem to this ecosystem, okay, they leave behind their predators. Their predators are still in that old ecosystem, but when they go to this new one, typically they don't have the same natural predators, okay? It would be like, imagine if took, I have no idea, took a bear and you put it in Africa, okay? So like a big black bear and you put it in Africa. Well, the stuff that that big black bear normally eats is not going to be found in Africa. So it's going to have to eat other stuff, right? And so that might reduce the food available for other individuals. Plus, that bear is not going to have any natural predators. So typically the bears up here, we hunt them. Well, maybe the people in Africa don't know that they can hunt them. So they're not going to have any predators. So they're going to reproduce really quickly and they're not going to die off because they have nothing to kill them in the food chain above them. And as a result, they take over ecosystems. So they dominate ecosystems. They're the main organism that's found in a lot of these places because there's nothing that can be done to control the population. And then lastly, we've got a couple examples of invasive species, okay? Zebra mussels, you guys are gonna learn about those in the video you're gonna watch. So zebra mussels are like little, kind of like clams, and they're in the Great Lakes, and they're trying to stop them from spreading to all of the different lakes in Wisconsin and Illinois. The crazy worm, you're gonna read an article about that. It looks like a regular worm, but it's kind of crazy. And you'll see why in the video. Kudzu, which is a super, super big vine. It covers everything. I'm going to go back to this picture. This is kudzu. So notice, it's covering everything. It's a vine and it covers everything. And then the Nile perch. So the Nile perch is over here. The Nile perch is a perch that was introduced into the Nile River in Africa, and it eats all of the little fishies. So the normal fish that are in there don't have any little fish to eat, and it basically eats all of them and gets really big and fat, and they can weigh over 100 pounds. So this guy is, he's got one right here, and they're trying to prevent these guys because they keep just eating everything in sight, and they don't have any natural predators. So here are some examples. You guys are going to read an article and watch a video, and yeah, that's it for invasive species.